Right, a very good afternoon, dear students. In this lecture video, I'm going to talk to you about global manufacturing strategies in international business. So, when a firm goes on to expand itself internationally by setting up subsidiaries in various countries and various continents of the world, what naturally happens is they just establish those subsidiaries and then they start selling their products and services to customers and clients in those particular markets. So other than the aspect of increasing sales and revenues and trying to cater to the needs and demands and requirements of customers and clients in the various foreign countries that they enter into, what also happens is when they set up subsidiaries in various countries and continents of the world, these firms also naturally get an advantage to tap the resources or the input materials of that particular country, uh, which may not be available in plenty in your country, or which may be of short supply in your country, which obviously does not give you a cost advantage. So when you set up businesses in more than about 20 to 30 different countries of the world, you are setting up businesses in these countries whereby you are not just having access to customers and clients in those respective markets. You're also having access to the various materials, the raw materials and various input factors that are available in plenty, or available at a very affordable cost compared to what it is in your country. So that is when organizations go into a mode of outsourcing and setting up global manufacturing around the world, wherever they get a cost advantage or wherever they are able to get an economies of scale advantage. So let's look at this example here. This is an example of Ford Motor Corporation. What Ford does for its manufacturing is it sources its vendors and manufacturing of these various components from various parts of Europe. So if you look at carburetors and distributors in this particular picture, carburetors and distributors are sourced from a particular place called Belfast, and then foundry production of engine comes from Leamington. You have final assembly of these components being done at Dagenham, and transmissions come from Bordeaux. Uh, and then you have Basildon that provides radiators, water pumps, pump assembly, and then you have transmission parts and engine components that comes from Ulfrath, and then you have final assembly happening in Valencia and so on. So here what Ford has done is it's broken up its entire product manufacturing into such an extent. It's divided that into various components, and it's outsourced it to various vendors from different countries or different parts of Europe, where they have a fairly good cost advantage and where they will be able to supply to Ford at a least cost, giving Ford a total advantage wherein the total landed cost of procuring, assembling, and then finally making it available to customers will be the cheapest in the market, and thereby it gives them a global price advantage when they get into competition with the rest of the other manufacturers who come from different parts of the world. So, why do firms want to manufacture globally? Right, as I told you with the Ford example, yes, they get a cost advantage because you're getting access to large volumes of raw materials and input factors from different parts of the world, which may be available to you at a very least cost. Secondly, you get access to raw materials in plenty. Third, you have access to those markets. So once you start establishing subsidiaries, initially you go with the intention of selling goods that you are domestically producing so that you are able to sell it to customers and clients in foreign markets. But once you see that the demand in the foreign markets is big enough, then you slowly start setting up a manufacturing unit and you slowly start becoming a wholly owned subsidiary, or you manufacture um, on your own, or you outsource it to other manufacturers by issuing a license to them to manufacture on your behalf, and then you can source it from different parts of the world, components from different parts of the world. You can assemble it and then you can sell it. So which means the production and consumption can take place in the same country if the volume of demand is much bigger and you want to take advantage of that. Fourthly, multi-point communication can also happen because buying and selling of goods and services across the world can be made a lot more easy, and you can set up a global supply chain whereby procurement, assembling, warehousing, manufacturing, and getting all these original equipments manufactured and components for your commodity manufactured from different parts of the world, and then you can assemble it and then you can sell it in the least effective, in the most effective and in the least cost manner. So those are advantages that a firm naturally gets, and that's the reason why more and more companies in international business get into the mode of outsourcing because they want to take advantage of it. So the overall goal of doing so is the improvement in cash flow of the parent firm to maximize shareholder wealth. So what happens is you are optimizing your cost and manufacturing and your entire production facility, thereby optimizing or getting a very high volume of profits for yourself in terms of the sales and profits that you're going to make because of the cost advantage that you're able to accrue because of because of global manufacturing and international outsourcing. So let's look at an example. Here we have an example for Nike. So Nike is an American footwear and an apparel company. So Nike right now operates more like a virtual organization because it's outsourced its entire footwear and apparel manufacturing to subcontractors who are situated in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and South Korea. So the subcontractors in these three countries are able to manufacture for the whole of the bulk of demand that Nike has. So furthermore, these subcontractors from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and South Korea outsource it further to smaller subcontractors in Indonesia, China, and Vietnam, where the product actually gets manufactured. So once it's manufactured, transportation and storage is taken care by third-party logistic players who take care of warehousing and transportation and make the good available in different markets of the world, and then make it and transport it to franchisee outlets or to retail outlets wherever Nike has retail interests, and thereby those retailers will be able to sell it to the final customers in different parts of the world. The Nike also has this very unique feature where a very high degree of customization is offered, where Nike's products can be customized or it can be designed by customers themselves by going into the website of Nike and then customizing the product or the apparel that they want. And once it is uploaded onto Nike's company system, and thereby it is further notified to all the manufacturers, and then they make the product available within the least available time. Within about 48 hours or 72 hours, they will be able to make the product available. So the question here is, if production, procurement, warehousing, transportation, retailing is all outsourced. So the question arises, what does Nike actually do as a company? If everything is outsourced, so what does Nike actually do? So Nike has outsourced all those operations or all those activities in manufacturing and business that it considers as non-core or non-integral, right? And it only retains two aspects. It retains branding and marketing, because Nike considers branding and marketing to be the core activities of business for Nike, and branding and marketing are the ones that ups or increases the sales for Nike worldwide. So rest of the other activities are very mundane or routine, or Nike feels that it is not relevant enough for Nike to put in a lot of effort and put in key players to operate on that. Hence, it retains only branding and marketing and outsources rest of the other activities to subcontractors and third-party operators who operate in the global supply chain today. So when organizations go or decide that they want to take advantage of the outsourcing that is prevalent in the international business, because you are spread out in different subsidiaries of the world, you have access to resources, you have access to input factors, you also have access to the various supply chain operators who are there in different parts of the world. So when the organization has to decide, when it comes to this point where it has to make a decision of make or buy, or what to outsource and what to keep it on its own, right? So that is where they have to answer three questions. So the three strategic questions that they will have to ask or make a decision upon is, the first question that any organization that wants to get into global outsourcing needs to ask is, what activities should be carried out by the firm and what should be outsourced. So you need to enlist all your business activities and then find out which of these activities are very critical and crucial for your organization, and which are the activities that are not critical and crucial. So what is critical and crucial is what you retain, and what is not critical and crucial is what you can outsource to other third party vendors or other uh, outsourcing partners who are willing to do business with your firm. Secondly, how to select the entities or partners to carry out outsourced activities. So once you are deciding that certain business non-core activities will have to be outsourced, you need to identify the vendors. So what vendors are you going to work with, who are going to be part of your supply chain, and then what are the terms and conditions with which you are going to work with them is the second set of decision that you will have to decide, which is the terms and conditions, or the basic um, uh, terms on which or the basic negotiable terms on which your organization is going to do business. And thirdly, what is going to be the nature of relationship. So once you have identified these vendors and you've established a set of terms and conditions with which you want to do business, you have to decide whether this is a transactional relationship or whether it's a long-term relationship. A transaction relationship is going to be a short-term relationship which is going to be bound by contract with specific terms and conditions. So you can sign up a particular vendor for outsourcing for a particular period of 2 years, and you can have a specific set of terms and conditions, and that particular contract is valid with the vendor for a period of 2 years. So after 2 years, you're going to assess the performance of the vendor and how good uh, a vendor has performed to the various conditions of outsourcing that you have placed. And if you are very satisfied, then you can continue the contract. And if you're not satisfied, you can always say no to the vendor. In the case of a long-term relationship with a vendor, you are signing a very open-ended kind of a contract, wherein there is where the relationship is not very time-bound, and it is going to stay existent. It's an open-ended one with no specific time clause as such. So these are three important decisions a firm will have to take when it goes into this decision of make or buy, or when it goes into the decision of becoming a part of the global outsourcing advantage. So the next question is, now how do we identify? The first question that we were answering, that a firm has to answer when it decides to take the outsourcing decision or the make or buy decision, is to decide which business activities are core and what business activities are non-core. So what needs to be outsourced and what needs to be kept by the firm. So two decisions further that it has to keep in mind. One is um, short-term benefit in mind, then long-term sustainability. So how do firms decide what is core and what they must make themselves? So that is where firms will have to keep in mind, are they looking at a short term benefit or are they looking at a long term benefit? So are you going to run this outsourcing for a certain period of time where you want to take a decision and you want to try it out for a certain period, and if it works you will continue, or you've made up your mind that you want to completely outsource it because you've had enough of it, and you've not been very successful in trying to make a particular product or a component on your own. Secondly, when you make this outsourcing decision, you must make sure that you must not match resources to capabilities, but you must be able to work with the best outsourcing partner or vendor in the world. That is very important. Not just somebody who's going to be willing to make a product or a component for you and help you to overcome a particular problem or a glitch that you have in your production and manufacturing process, but you must be able to sign up a vendor who's the best in the world or best in class, and that is when you will be able to accrue the advantage. And where a firm that is working with an outsourced partner who's the best in class will also mutually learn in the long run, and that can help you to come up with more innovative products and offer better quality services to your customers and clients worldwide in the long run. So there are two ways by which we can decide what is core and what is non-core. There are two methods that are suggested. The first method is called the business process route, and the second method is called the product architecture route. So these are two methods by which we can understand which of the business activities that we are running right now are core, and which are the activities that we are running right now which are non-core. So let's look at what the first method will be. The business route process where a firm will have to list out all its core processes. So that could begin with procurement, manufacturing, transportation, warehousing. Then it could be retailing, it could be customer service. So you list down all those business activities that you are doing. For any firm, three core and high level business processes include customer relationship, product innovation, and supply chain management. So, three things are very often considered to be very core for any organization. One is customer relationship, which is considered to be very core because you need to keep in touch with your customers. Second is product innovation because designing and developing new products and services should be your forte rather than giving it to an outsourcing partner. And thirdly, you must be able to establish a very good supply chain management, and that should be under your control. So, is it possible for a firm to unbundle these and outsource any two business processes? So, these three are very important. But what is suggested is a firm should retain one or two and then try to outsource as many as possible to other third party vendors and other outsourcing partners. A firm must identify and ensure that it builds core competencies in house in at least one of these areas. So, you need to identify when you retain the business activity that you're going to retain should be the one in which you have a core competency, in which you have not just a competitive advantage, but you have a core competency, and you must be the best in the world when it comes to manufacturing that particular component or doing that particular business activity compared to rest of the others in the world. So when you have a core competency, retain the business activity in which you have a core competency and outsource the rest of the others that you think can be done and can be handled by other parties a lot more effectively than yourself. So the focal aspect in this particular method is core processes retained within the company must be strategic from a business point of view. It must be something very critical, something in which you have a core competency, and something that must be able to contribute heavily to the strategy implementation and the earnings and the cash flows of your organization. So firms must realize that value within the chain gets distributed to the chain partners on the basis of the unique capabilities that are brought to them. So when you have different partners, outsourcing partners coming on board, you're establishing a supply chain, right? And all the various partners who are coming on board are the best in class, and they are specialists in their own respective business activity or in their own respective field. So when you have a core competency in a business activity that you have retained, other outsourced outsourcing partners will have core competencies in their own respective areas. So you need to understand that the value chain is now with the best in class in your business and the best in class in the world, and that's how value can get distributed across the value chain. And you need all these vendors to very effectively contribute for the success of what your organization is going to gain out of this global outsourcing and uh, and through the global supply chain. So a firm must ensure that in-house processes give it enough bargaining power in the chain and do not allow other chain partners to dictate terms of the value chain. So one aspect that you must be able to keep in mind is you must it is your firm and it is you who's outsourcing it to the best of the class. But eventually what can happen is, since you are dealing with expert vendors and outsourcing partners, sometimes during the course of operating the supply chain, you might tend to feel that the outsourcing partners seem to be thrusting more pressure or thrusting more demand, or are probably demanding more or expecting more from the organization. So that is when you slowly begin to feel that you are losing bargaining power. So something that you were supposed to have in control is now lost to the suppliers and to the rest of the others in the supply chain, and then they are dictating terms to you. So that can actually put you into a lot of trouble. So that is one particular aspect that we must be able to keep in mind. So when you are part of a supply chain, you must ensure that you are in a position where you are able to dictate the terms and conditions and have a greater degree of bargaining power over the supply chain. So the next method by which you can be able to decide what is core and what is non-core is the product architecture route. So in the product architecture approach, the focus is on the subsystems and the components, and the make or buy decisions are made at that particular level. So this is mostly for product assembling firms, right? The previous one, the business route, for mostly for service oriented firms, so where 30% of the component was just the production and 70% is of services. But in the product architecture route, it will be 70% production and 30% services. So these are mostly for product oriented firms, mostly for B2B kind of organizations. So in this particular approach, what you do is you break down your product, you unbundle or you dismantle your product, and then every component of your product that is going to be brought in, just like what we saw in the Ford's example. Ford's example is where a motor car is being dismantled, and every component or subpart is being outsourced from a particular place or from a particular vendor, from wherever these subsidiaries are established. So here again, you're doing something very similar. So you break that down into subsystems and various components, and then you're going to decide which component am I going to make myself and which component am I going to outsource. So in the subsystem, the products are classified into strategic product components and non-strategic, and then based on that, you decide to keep what is strategic, and what is non-strategic is what you will outsource to other vendors and partners. What you must also keep in mind in this particular scenario is the technology uh, related to your product and to your industry keeps changing quite rapidly, and specialized skills and knowledge is required at different points of time, because product can get outdated whenever there is a technological change, or whenever there is a new product innovation that comes into the market, or whenever there is a disruption in technology or in innovation. So your products that you're selling right now can get outdated, and that can really bother you. So you must be able to keep in mind these changes that are going to disrupt your status quo, this normal uh, functioning that you are into right now. So those aspects are definitely going to bring about a change. And if the product is not too very fine, then it's going to affect the performance, and if the performance is not up to the expectations of what clients and customers around the world want, then you definitely will be that's when you will be on the losing side. So it's very important um, when we take the business process route, or we take the product architecture route, and then we are going to decide how are we going to go about with this decision of make or buy. We must be able to keep and bear this in mind, that this is not a decision that you can change um, later in about 2 months or 3 months. You feel that this is not going fine, you want to change, or you want to resign the contract. So it's not possible, because this is a commitment, right? Once you make a decision, it's a commitment that you're making with vendors, and there's a lot of investment, time, money, energy, and investment that is going into setting up this global supply chain system. And then naturally, other vendors are also coming on board, or also coming and putting their interest and stake into this entire value chain. So it has to be a win-win sort of a process, and that is how firms, all the firms in the supply chain will be able to gain. So this should be a decision that we need to take with a lot of thought, with a lot of care, and then be able to sustain that for a long period of time once we've committed and made a decision as such. So that's when we decide what to make and what to retain. So we will make products using those two methods. We're going to decide what to make. So all those components where the firm has an edge and can maintain leadership position, or wherever it has a very superior competitive advantage or core competency, those are business activities and component manufacturing that you're going to retain, which is what you will make on your own. You will buy it or outsource it if the suppliers have an edge over the component, and they are best in class, and they are able to give you a best advantage, and they right now have a cost advantage. So if you feel that your vendors are in a much more superior position compared to you, and they have the competitive advantage, then that's when you can decide to outsource. So whatever you do, the focal point that you must be able to keep in mind is the firm might not design, might not control the design, but must retain an expert in architectural knowledge. So which means this threat of bargaining power and your outsourcing partners trying to take control over your operations and your value chain and supply chain is always a threat. So irrespective of whatever you outsource, you must be able to, you may not be an expert in those particular fields, but you may not have the domain knowledge, but you must be able to have um, the working knowledge or the architectural knowledge that is very necessary to be able to have a control over these vendors and also be able to have a say over what they are doing, and not just give it away to them to decide whatever they think is good for the company or for the supply chain as such. And that is when firms tend to slowly start losing power, and then you feel that you have become more of a pawn in the hands of these outsourced partners and vendors in the long run. So that can be a big pitfall for companies that get into global outsourcing. So that's an area that we need to be very careful about and watch out for. So what are the different types of global sourcing that can happen? So we can do something called, there are two forms, two types. One is called an intra-firm sourcing and the other is outsourcing. So intra-firm sourcing is where the procurement of all your raw materials and components is going to be done by the firm itself. That's why we call it as intra-firm. Under the intra-firm, you can do it domestically and you can do it internationally. Domestically is where you have a procurement department within your organization, and your department is procuring all these raw materials input factors from all the domestic suppliers who are there in your country. Intra-firm outsourcing sourcing international is where you can be sourcing. Your procurement department is going to source raw materials and input factors from all those countries and subsidiaries, all those countries where you have subsidiaries. So you are establishing contact with those subsidiaries which belong to your firm, and thereby you are able to source it from those countries on your own through your procurement department. So in this particular case, the procurement department of the firm does it both domestically and does it both internationally wherever it has established its subsidiaries. That's how you're able to source and get the kind of raw materials that you want for your manufacturing process. When it comes to outsourcing, you are outsourcing the entire procurement of raw material and input factors to a third party, and the outsourced vendor can procure that domestically, can source it domestically through various industrial distributors and other agents who are there in the market who can get the required raw materials and input factors for you. So they can do that through a domestic purchase arrangement, or the entire outsourcing that you have given to a third party. Now that third party can go ahead and identify raw materials and suppliers, raw material suppliers and input factor suppliers from different parts of the world, establish contact with them, and then import them to the country, and then later supply it to you. So those are two broad forms that we have: an intra-firm sourcing and an outsourcing. And the firm that is naturally getting into outsourcing will have to decide which one will they be able to take up, so that they are able to very effectively operate the procurement function and then be able to get the right type of raw material and resources in the least cost method or through the least cost logistics that's available, and thereby have the advantage. So if intra-firm sourcing is able to give you an advantage and you are an expert in that particular field and you have competitive advantage compared to rest of the other outsourcing partners, then you can go ahead and do it. But if you feel that intra-firm sourcing is a lot more expensive and it takes a lot more time and effort and people, and you want to cut down on all of that, then you can straight away go in for outsourcing and identify a third party outsourcing partner who will further take up the responsibility of sourcing it both domestically as well as internationally. So these are options that are available with a firm that wants to take advantage of the scenario that is prevalent in the outsourcing market. So global manufacturing strategies, manufacturing configuration, a few decisions that we need to be able to make. So these are a set of decisions that a firm will have to decide. Should manufacturing be centralized in one country, or should we have manufacturing facilities in specific zones to service those zones or regions, or should we go in for a multi-domestic strategy facility, so that we have a production and consumption facility in that same country. So this is a decision that can be taken up by the firm, but this largely depends on the type of strategy that you are going to take. If you're using an international strategy, then you might have the manufacturing unit in your country and you will only export finished commodities to the foreign markets. If you have a multi-domestic strategy, then you might think about having a manufacturing unit in that particular country, either on your own or through a joint venture or through a licensed partner who's going to manufacture goods on your behalf, customize products according to the markets in that particular country, and thereby be able to sell. Thirdly, when you are looking at a global strategy, you might think about having a spread of these manufacturing units. You might have about two or three different large factories in the world where those three factories are going to manufacture for rest of the consumption demand that comes from different parts of the world, and thereby you will be able to get advantage of it. Transnational corporation strategy, TNCs, the TNC will give you that advantage of being able to acquire raw material resource in different parts of the world, and thereby you can have a regional setup, and whereby you can regionally source it, and thereby you will be able to get an advantage of it. So what sort of manufacturing configuration and what is the strategy that you're going to take up, whether it's a centralized location manufacturing or a decentralized location manufacturing, depends on the international business strategy that you are adopting and the kind of long term goals that you have for your organization and for the business as such. Secondly, um, once you are able to do that, you must be able to have a very good coordination and control. And that is where choosing the right type of organization structure is going to help you to implement the strategy depending on the international strategy that you are going to take up. So, adopting the right kind of organization structure becomes very important. So, as we've discussed, the different types of organization structures could be a functional structure, could be an international division structure, could be a global division, a product area structure, could be a global market division structure, or could be a matrix structure. So, whichever structure that you think is very convenient for you to have coordination and control over all the activities that you're going to do within your domestic market, as well as with all those subsidiaries where you've established businesses. So you choosing the right structure will enable you to implement these strategies a little more further well as you go down into uh, the real crux of expanding your business internationally. Global manufacturing strategy is the third decision that you need to take up is plant location. So that is where do you locate your factory, or what sort of to which particular country or vendor are you going to give the outsourcing. It depends on a lot of cost equations. So they will be your transportation cost, your duties, how closer you are to the markets that you're going to cater to, your proximity to your suppliers, your foreign exchange, currency rates and their fluctuations, economies of scale that you will be able to accrue, incentives that you're getting from host governments, climate, technological requirements. So all of these factors are very important. So when you are deciding to set up a plant or you're going to outsource it to a particular vendor in a particular country, you must be able to assess and understand that the outsourcing partner or vendor is having a majority of these advantages, and only when they have a majority of these advantages will the total landed cost of production of your commodity come down. So that is where you need to establish your plant or locate your plant in such a place where it is equidistant to both the suppliers as well as the markets, and you're able to get a complete advantage of the supply chain. Fourthly, the plant layout planning. Once you've located your plant, the kind of design that you're going to take up to locate your plant layout and ensure that you're going to set up a location with keeping in consideration the cost of labor, uh, the technology that's going to come in, the machinery, the automation, and the expansion that you're going to decide to have in future. So keeping all of that in mind, you've got to design plant layout in such a way that's going to give you a very good advantage, increases the efficiency of manufacturing, thereby cutting down cost of the entire process that's going to be involved in manufacturing. So these are some major decisions that we've got to take. When you are now, these four decisions are going to be taken by you, and this becomes of paramount importance to you if you are going to decide to do the manufacturing. If you are making the product or the component on your own, if you are buying the outsourcing it or buying it from suppliers or third party vendors, then you must make sure that these four advantages are there with the outsourcing vendor or the partner to whom you want to outsource product manufacturing or the component manufacturing as such. So that's when we talk about establishing a global supply chain. So once you get into global outsourcing and as you get connected with the various players who are there in the global supply chain, right from raw material suppliers to various production factories to warehousing vendors to transportation agents to logistic providers to C&F agents and then several other players who operate in the global supply chain to enable that a product that is manufactured from a producer's end reaches the customer at any part of the world. So that is when we today have a very efficient supply chain system that's operating in place. So the supply chain management describes every manager's effort to oversee the flow of raw materials, components, information, and finance through the network of suppliers, assemblers, distributors, and customers who are located around the world. So you're going to establish this network of all these procurement operators and manufacturers around the world, assemblers, suppliers, distributors, and then be able to efficiently take the product to the doorstep of the customer at the least cost, so that you're able to give the customer a very good price advantage and make your product a lot more competitive in the international market. So that is where we need to be able to do that. Secondly, have all the vendors or all the players of your supply chain on board and ensure that you're efficiently able to run the supply chain and have the control and coordination over your supply chain and ensure that you are able to retain the bargaining power over all your business activities that you do in your supply chain. Thirdly, supply chain management and ERP. ERP is a software that enables us to very efficiently run the supply chain smoothly so that we are able to overcome any sort of bottlenecks that happen in supply and demand or wherever there is an information break. This becomes very important because you have multiple vendors who are coming on board, a network of vendors, network of suppliers, a network of supply chain operators coming on board and working together. So if you want to establish a very good coordination and then ensure that everything operates very smoothly and the product finally reaches a customer at their doorstep, uh, without much of trouble, all that can be done through an ERP system, and that's how it helps companies to effectively implement a supply chain. Fourthly, today e-commerce is making it possible through its virtual operations, and the use of the internet, intranet, and extranet is also uh, very prominently used in running the supply chain. And that is how today we are able to establish business contacts with anybody in any part of the world. And firms today are able to leverage that advantage of being an international operator, a global player. And they're able to accrue the benefits of what supply chain offers to them. So these are the various components, the linkage of activities between buying, making, and moving, and then integrating the suppliers, distributors, and various logistic players who come into the supply chain system. Now, all of them are going to very actively participate and play their role and part, thereby enabling a firm to get the advantage of a supply chain. So building this network of suppliers takes a lot of time, but once you are able to do that, keeping in mind the right type of vendors and being able to work with vendors who are best in class and who have core competencies of their own, and then who can help your organization to also mutually grow in the long run. So you must be able to connect with those kind of operators and players, and that's when you will be able to get that advantage of a very efficient global supply chain operator, and then you will see the benefit for yourself. So we come to the end of this particular topic on global manufacturing, outsourcing, and supply chain. So this is the network of supplier to the manufacturer, manufacturer to the distributor, distributor to the retail outlet, and then from the retail outlet to the customer. And thereby, we bring a backward linkage where customer feedback and inputs travel to the retail outlets and they come back to the distributor, manufacturer, and to the supplier, and then we make necessary course corrections whenever goods do not match the expectations and demands of customers, or when products get rejected by customers because of um, certain faults or mistakes in their in the manufacturing, or they malfunction. Then that's when the feedback goes back to the entire back end of the supply chain. We call it as a reverse supply chain, and that's when information goes back, and then we start using that information to make the necessary corrections as such. So what you see here is a very linear um, design of a supply chain, but a supply chain doesn't look like this. It's not linear, it's more of a network, because you don't just have one supplier. You might have about 50 to 100 suppliers. You don't have just one manufacturer. You might have about 30 manufacturers who manufacture different components which are necessary for your product, and thereby you have more number of distributors, and you are selling it across the world in different markets, and you have thousands or millions of these kind of retail distributors who are spread out around the world to ensure that your right product reaches the right customer, and thereby ensure that they bring back the value for you and bring back the profits that you should be getting because of setting up an excellent world-class global supply chain system as such. Thank you.